I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from. He's gone. We need to leave now. The words, so softly spoken yet so urgent, cut through the noise of O'Hare International Airport like a knife. I turned to look at my 7-year-old granddaughter, Chloe Wilson, whose small hand suddenly gripped mine with surprising strength. What are you talking about, sweetheart? I asked, watching my son Daniel's plane taxi away from the gate. We just said goodbye to your dad. He'll be back from London in a week. But Chloe's eyes weren't on the departing plane. They were fixed on something or someone behind us. Her normally cheerful face suddenly pale and serious. We have to go. Grandma Amanda, now. Her voice trembled slightly, but her grip remained firm as she tugged me toward the exit. I'd spent 68 years developing the habit of listening to children when they spoke with such conviction. Something in her tone, an echo of her father's decisiveness, made me glance casually over my shoulder as if checking the departure board. If you're watching, please subscribe to the channel, like it, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. 2 men in dark suits stood near the security checkpoint, their attention fixed unmistakably on us. Nothing in their appearance was overtly threatening, yet something about their stance, the deliberate way they surveyed the terminal while maintaining awareness of our position, triggered a long dormant alarm in my mind. All right, let's get to the car, I agreed, adjusting my handbag on my shoulder and guiding Chloe toward the exit with forced casualness. It's getting late anyway. We moved through the crowded terminal at a measured pace, not too fast to draw attention, but with clear purpose. Chloe stayed close to my side, her favorite stuffed rabbit, Mr. Whiskers, clutched tightly to her chest. Are they following us, Grandma? She whispered as we stepped onto the escalator leading to the parking garage. I resisted the urge to look back. How did you know about those men, Chloe? Daddy said they might come. He said if I saw men in dark suits watching us after he left, I should tell you we need to leave right away. Her voice was barely audible over the ambient noise of the airport. A chill ran through me. Daniel, my practical, rational son who worked as a financial director at Global Meridian Investments, had never been prone to paranoia or melodrama. If he had warned his daughter about potential watchers, he must have had serious reasons. The parking garage was half empty, our sedan parked in a row of vehicles on the 3rd level. As we approached, I casually scanned the area, spotting a dark SUV with tinted windows idling 2 rows over. The driver appeared to be speaking into a phone or radio. Chloe, I said quietly, did your father tell you anything else? Anything I should know? She nodded solemnly. He said if the bad men came, I should give you Mr. Whiskers. He has something special inside. She hesitated. And Daddy said not to use our phones. They can listen. I unlocked the car, helping Chloe into the back seat and securing her seatbelt before walking around to the driver's side. Through the rearview mirror, I saw the elevator doors open, revealing the 2 men from the terminal. Decades of teaching high school history hadn't prepared me for this moment, but the years I'd spent as a single mother after my husband's early death had taught me one crucial lesson when protecting family. Hesitation is your worst enemy. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking space, driving normally toward the exit. The SUV I'd noticed earlier also began moving, falling into position several cars behind us. At the payment booth, I handed over cash rather than using the credit card I normally would have a decision prompted by Chloe's warning about phones. If they could listen to calls, electronic payments would leave an equally clear trail. As we merged onto the highway, I made a split-second decision to avoid our usual route home to the Chicago suburbs. Instead, I took the exit for downtown, entering the maze of the city where we might lose our followers in the evening traffic. Chloe, I said, keeping my voice calm while checking the mirrors constantly. I need you to give me Mr. Whiskers now. She passed the worn stuffed rabbit forward, its once white fur now gray with years of love. Daddy said you'd need to look inside the special pocket. I handed the rabbit back. Hold him for now. When we get somewhere safe, I'll look. Are we in danger, Grandma? She asked, her voice small but steady. I met her eyes in this rearview mirror, struck by how much she resembled Daniel at that age, the same serious expression when confronting difficult truths. I'm not sure yet, sweetheart, but your father clearly wanted us to be careful, so that's what we're going to do. The SUV remained several cars behind us, too consistent to be coincidence. I made a series of random turns through city streets, confirming my suspicion when it adjusted course to match our seemingly erratic path. My mind raced with questions. What had Daniel gotten himself involved in? Why hadn't he warned me directly? What information could be so dangerous that it would make my accountant's son turn his daughter into a secret messenger? I pulled into the underground parking garage of a large downtown hotel, driving to the lowest level before finding a space partially obscured by a concrete pillar. After turning off the engine, I sat still for a moment, gathering my thoughts. Let me see Mr. Whiskers now. Chloe. She handed me the stuffed rabbit, watching intently as I examined it. A small, nearly invisible seam ran along its back, different from the factory stitching. I carefully pulled it open, revealing a hidden pocket. Inside was a small USB drive and a handwritten note in Daniel's precise handwriting. Mom, if you're reading this, it means we're all in danger. I couldn't tell you directly they're watching me too closely. I've uncovered financial evidence of massive corruption and illegal weapons deals at Global Meridian. The USB contains proof, but it's encrypted. You'll need the password. Do not go home. Do not use credit cards or phones. They have resources everywhere. Go to the public library downtown. In the history section, find American Century by Evan's dad's favorite. Page 187 has the next instructions. Trust no one except Thomas Reynolds at the Chicago Tribune. He's expecting the evidence. I'm sorry to put you and Chloe in this position. Keep her safe. I'll contact you when I can. Love, Daniel. I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket along with the USB drive, my hands shaking slightly as the reality of our situation began to sink in. My son, always the most cautious and ethical person I knew, had apparently stumbled onto something dangerous enough to send him fleeing the country and to turn his mother and daughter into fugitives. What did Daddy say? Chloe asked, her young face showing a maturity beyond her years. That we need to be very brave, I replied, starting the car again. And that we have a very important mission. As we exited the parking garage through a different ramp, I caught sight of the black SUV circling the hotel entrance, searching for us. We had gained a temporary advantage, but I knew it wouldn't last long. For 40 years, I'd been Amanda Wilson, widow, history teacher, grandmother, a woman whose greatest adventures had been lived vicariously through books. Now, in the space of 30 minutes, I had become something else entirely, a guardian of dangerous secrets, a runner from unnamed threats, protector of both my granddaughter and whatever explosive truth my son had risked everything to expose. The Chicago evening spread before us, its familiar skyline suddenly seeming alien and full of potential threats. I checked the mirrors one more time and set course for the downtown public library, wondering how many other ordinary lives had been upended by a single whispered warning. He's gone. We need to leave now. 6 simple words that had changed everything. The Chicago Public Library stood like a fortress of knowledge against the darkening sky, its massive stone facade illuminated by strategically placed lights. Under different circumstances, I would have appreciated its grandeur. Tonight, it represented only a temporary haven, a place to find the next breadcrumb in whatever trail Daniel had left for us. I parked 2 blocks away in a public garage, paying cash again. Before leaving the car, I rummaged through the emergency bag I kept in the trunk, a habit formed during harsh Midwestern winters, finding a baseball cap and light jacket for myself and a hooded sweatshirt for Chloe. We're going to play a game, I told her as we walked toward the library, my eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. We're going to pretend to be different people for a little while, like actors in a play. Chloe nodded solemnly. Because of the bad men. Yes, sweetheart. Just to be safe. I can be Elsa, she declared, referring to her favorite character from the movies she watched endlessly. And you can be Anna, I supplied, grateful for her ability to frame our situation as an adventure rather than a nightmare. Sisters stick together, right? Her small hand squeezed mine in agreement as we climbed the library steps. Inside, the cavernous main hall buzzed with the quiet energy of evening patrons, students hunched over laptops, elderly men reading newspapers, young professionals browsing new releases. We blended into this tableau of normality, just a grandmother and granddaughter visiting the library on a weeknight. The history section occupied most of the 3rd floor, rows of shelves creating a labyrinth of knowledge spanning centuries and continents. I moved with purpose, years of teaching history giving me an intuitive sense of where to look. American history, mid-20th century, there it would be. American Century by Evans, I murmured, running my fingers along the spines until I found it a thick volume with a faded dust jacket showing the iconic image of Times Square on VJ Day. My late husband James had indeed loved this book, keeping a copy in his study throughout our marriage. Daniel's reference wasn't random. He was using family knowledge as security information that wouldn't appear in any database mining of our personal details. I pulled the volume from the shelf and turned to page 187. There, tucked between pages detailing the Marshall Plan, was a small envelope. I slipped it into my pocket without examining its contents, returned the book to its place, and guided Chloe toward the children's section. "Can we get some books, Grandma?" she asked as we passed colorful displays. "Not today, sweetheart. We need to keep moving." I softened the denial with a gentle squeeze of her shoulder. "But maybe you could choose one for me to tell you about later from memory." While Chloe deliberated between picture books displayed on a revolving rack, I found a quiet corner and quickly examined the envelope's contents. Inside was a small key, old-fashioned, possibly for a safety deposit box, and another note in Daniel's handwriting. First National Bank, Box 1547. Access code is Dad's birthday plus Chloe's. Go tomorrow morning when it opens. Inside is everything Reynolds needs. Tonight, stay somewhere unexpected. They'll check hotels under your name and credit cards. The password for the USB, Whiskers 2016. Be careful, Mom. These people have resources and connections everywhere. Trust your instincts. I memorized the contents before tearing the note into tiny pieces and disposing of them in separate trash bins throughout the library. The key went into the small zippered pocket inside my handbag alongside the USB drive. As I returned to the children's section, a movement near the elevator caught my attention, a man in a dark suit speaking quietly into his wrist, his eyes scanning the floor with methodical precision. My pulse quickened. They had found us more quickly than I'd anticipated. Chloe was still engrossed in the picture books, unaware of the danger. I approached her casually, bending down as if to see her selection. "We need to leave now through the back stairs," I whispered, gesturing toward the emergency exit at the far end of the floor. "Remember, we're still playing our game. Walk normally but quickly." Her eyes widened slightly, but she nodded, clutching Mr. Whiskers tighter as we moved between the shelves, using the library's layout to obscure our path from the man by the elevator. The emergency exit opened onto a stairwell that descended all the way to the basement level. We hurried down, the sound of our footsteps echoing despite my attempts at quietness. At the bottom, a service corridor led to a loading dock where library staff were unloading boxes from a delivery van. I guided Chloe past them with a confident nod as if we belonged, emerging onto a side street away from the main entrance. Night had fully descended now, the city transformed into a landscape of shadows and artificial light. "Where are we going, Grandma?" Chloe asked as we walked briskly away from the library, her small legs working double time to keep pace. A good question, one I was still answering myself. We couldn't go home. Daniel had been clear about that. Hotels required ID and credit cards. Friends or other family members would be obvious places for these people with resources to look. Then I remembered Maria Vasquez, a former student who had become a friend over the years. She managed a small apartment building in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood on the west side, catering to new immigrants and visiting relatives who sometimes needed accommodation without paperwork or questions. "We're going to visit a friend," I told Chloe, flagging down a taxi at the corner. "Someone who can help us." In the taxi, I gave the driver an address 3 blocks from Maria's building, unwilling to leave a direct trail. Chloe leaned against me, fatigue finally catching up with her after the stress and excitement of our escape. "You're being so brave," I whispered, stroking her hair. "Your dad would be proud." "Is Daddy in trouble?" she asked, her voice muffled against my side. "He's trying to fix something that's wrong," I answered carefully. "Sometimes doing the right thing can be dangerous, but it's still important to do it." She nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Like in Harry Potter when they have to fight Voldemort even though it's scary." "Exactly like that," I agreed, marveling at how children could often distill complex moral situations to their essence. Maria's building was a modest 3-story walk-up on a street lined with similar structures, their facades brightened by window boxes and cultural touches that transformed institutional architecture into homes. The neighborhood hummed with evening life, families chatting on stoops, music drifting from open windows, the scent of various cuisines mingling in the air. Maria answered her door with surprise that quickly shifted to concern as she took in our appearance and the urgency in my eyes. Amanda, what brings you here so late? And with the little one, too. Maria, I need a favor, I said quietly. We need a place to stay tonight. Somewhere no one would think to look for us. And I need to borrow your laptop, if possible. To her credit, Maria asked no questions beyond what was necessary. Within 20 minutes, we were settled in a small but clean studio apartment on the 3rd floor, typically used for visiting relatives. She brought us a laptop, some basic toiletries, and a bag of food from her own kitchen. Whatever trouble you're in, Amanda, you know you can trust me, she said at the door. It's better if you don't know the details, I replied, touched by her unhesitating help. But thank you. We won't stay long. Just tonight. After she left, I made a simple dinner from the food she'd provided, watching Chloe eat with relief. Children were remarkably resilient, but they still needed the basics: food, rest, and a sense of security, however provisional. Once she was tucked into bed, Mr. Whiskers clutched to her chest. I sat at the small table by the window and inserted the USB drive into Maria's laptop. A single encrypted file appeared, requesting a password. I typed in Whiskers 2016 and held my breath. The file opened, revealing hundreds of documents, financial records, emails, meeting transcripts, and photographs. I wasn't a financial expert, but even to my untrained eye, the evidence was damning. Global Meridian Investments had apparently been facilitating money laundering for several drug cartels and terrorist organizations, disguising the transactions as legitimate investments while skimming millions in fees. Worse, they had been financing weapons deals to conflict zones under embargo, using humanitarian aid organizations as fronts. Names of high-ranking executives appeared throughout, including several who held positions in regulatory bodies and government agencies. The corruption wasn't just within the company, it had metastasized into the very systems designed to prevent such activities. No wonder Daniel had fled. No wonder he couldn't risk direct communication. The people implicated in these documents had everything to lose if this information became public. I closed the files and removed the USB drive, my hands trembling slightly. Tomorrow we would need to access the safety deposit box and then find this Thomas Reynolds at the Chicago Tribune. But for tonight, our only job was to rest and remain hidden. From the bed, Chloe's voice drifted softly through the darkness. Grandma, are we going to be okay? I moved to sit beside her, brushing the hair from her forehead. Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be just fine. Your dad trusted us with something very important, and we're going to help him make things right. She nodded sleepily, already drifting off. I knew you would know what to do. Daddy said you were the bravest person he ever knew. The words caught me by surprise, a warm counterpoint to the fear and uncertainty that had dominated the evening. In Daniel's eyes, apparently, I wasn't just a retired history teacher who made good cookies and remembered birthdays. I was someone capable of facing danger, of protecting what mattered when everything was at stake. As I returned to my vigil by the window, watching the street below for any sign of unusual activity, I wondered if he was right. Bravery had never been how I would have described myself. Practical, perhaps determined, resilient but brave. The night stretched before us, filled with unknowns. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers. But tonight, in this small apartment far from our comfortable suburban existence, I made a silent promise to my absent son and the sleeping child who trusted me so completely. I would become whatever this situation required: brave, cunning, resourceful. The people hunting us might have resources and connections, but I had something more powerful: a lifetime of underestimation as an elderly woman and the fierce, uncompromising love of a grandmother protecting her family. They wouldn't see me coming, and that would be their mistake. Dawn broke over Chicago, painting the city skyline in shades of amber and gold that belied the danger lurking in its streets. I had slept fitfully, jerking awake at every distant siren or raised voice from the street below. Now, watching Chloe sleep peacefully with Mr. Whiskers tucked under her chin, I allowed myself a moment of doubt. Was I truly equipped for this? At 68, my expertise lay in explaining the Treaty of Versailles to restless teenagers, not outmaneuvering corporate assassins. Yet here I was, planning our approach to a bank as if it were a military operation, all based on cryptic instructions from my son, who was now halfway across the Atlantic. Chloe stirred, her eyes opening with that peculiar clarity children sometimes possess upon waking. No gradual transition, just an immediate presence. "Are we going to see Daddy today?" she asked, sitting up and rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Not today, sweetheart," I answered, helping her out of bed. "Today, we're going to follow the next clue your father left us. Like a treasure hunt." She brightened at this framing. "With the key you found in the book." "Exactly. But first, breakfast." Maria had slipped a bag outside our door containing fresh clothes for both of us, simple, practical items that would help us blend into the city crowd. There was also a note informing me she had called in a favor from her cousin who drove a taxi. He would take us wherever we needed to go. No questions asked. By 8:30 we were in her cousin Ramon's taxi, heading toward the downtown financial district. I had explained to Chloe the importance of our game continuing. We would use different names, avoid drawing attention, and most importantly, she should never mention her father or why we were really at the bank. "If anyone asks, we're just getting some of Grandma's special jewelry out of the box," I told her as the taxi navigated morning traffic. "Can you remember that?" She nodded solemnly. "I'm good at remembering things. Daddy says I have an elephant's memory." First National Bank occupied a limestone building that exuded stability and tradition attributes that had once seemed reassuring, but now felt like a facade concealing darker truths. How many other transactions within these respectable walls served purposes like those documented in Daniel's files? Ramon agreed to wait for us, finding a spot near a coffee shop across the street. I took Chloe's hand as we ascended the broad stone steps, consciously adjusting my posture to project confidence rather than the apprehension churning inside me. The lobby bustled with morning activity tellers serving early customers, business people making deposits, security guards casually surveying the space. I approached the information desk where a young woman greeted us with a professional smile. "Good morning. How may I help you today?" "I need to access my safety deposit box, please," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Number 1547. Of course. May I see your identification?" I presented my driver's license, breathing an internal sigh of relief when she merely glanced at it before typing something into her computer. If the people pursuing us had already flagged my identification, we would know very soon. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. And I see this box has a registered access code." "Yes," I confirmed, combining the two dates as Daniel had instructed. EO615924. My husband's birthday, June 15th, followed by Chloe's, September 24th. Another piece of family knowledge that wouldn't appear in any financial database. The woman nodded and directed us to a seating area while a bank officer was summoned to escort us to the vault. Chloe sat quietly beside me, swinging her legs and clutching Mr. Whiskers, the picture of innocence. I scanned the lobby carefully, noting each person who entered, alert for dark suits or suspicious glances. A middle-aged man in a tailored gray suit approached us after a few minutes. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm Mr. Daniels. If you'll follow me, I'll take you to your box." We followed him through a secured door and down a corridor to the vault area. The massive steel door stood open during business hours, revealing rows of metal boxes embedded in the walls. Another employee verified my identification and access code before Mr. Daniels used his key in conjunction with mine to remove box 1547. "You can use this private room," he said, placing the long metal container on a table in a small adjoining space. "Take as much time as you need. Just press the button when you're finished." When the door closed behind him, I immediately opened the box. Inside was a sealed manila envelope, a prepaid cell phone, and a thick stack of cash secured with a rubber band. I quickly counted the money, $10,000 in various denominations, before turning my attention to the envelope. The contents were sparse, but significant: a formal letter from Daniel to Thomas Reynolds at the Chicago Tribune, authorizing the release of all documents. A USB drive labeled Backup Original Documents, and a handwritten note addressed to me. "Mom, if you've made it this far, they're definitely after you. The backup USB contains the same files plus originals I couldn't risk leaving on the first drive. Take everything to Reynolds immediately. He's expecting you today. The prepaid phone has one number programmed a secure line that will reach me eventually. Use it only in absolute emergency, as it can be traced after activation." After delivering everything to Reynolds, take Chloe and leave Chicago. Use the cash for transportation and accommodations. Avoid planes or trains where ID is required. There's a cabin in Michigan that Dad and I used to visit, the fishing place on Cedar Lake. Remember it? The key is still hidden under the same rock by the back door. Go there and wait for my contact. I'm so sorry for putting you through this. I never intended for either of you to be involved. But when I realized how deep this went and how closely I was being watched, I had no choice. Tell Chloe I love her more than anything. I folded the note and placed it in my pocket, then gathered everything else into my handbag. Chloe watched me with curious eyes but asked no questions, seeming to understand instinctively that this was the serious part of our game. Did you find the treasure? She whispered as I closed the empty box. We found the next clue, I replied softly. And now we need to deliver it to a special person who can help your daddy. I pressed the button to summon Mr. Daniels, using the brief waiting period to compose myself. We were halfway through Daniel's trail of breadcrumbs, moving steadily toward whatever endgame he had planned. But if my years teaching history had taught me anything, it was that the most dangerous moment often comes not at the beginning of a revolution, but when its success begins to seem possible. The Chicago Tribune offices were only 15 blocks away. As we left the bank and returned to Ramon's waiting taxi, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that somewhere in the morning crowd, eyes were tracking our movement, calculating our destination, preparing to intercept us before we could deliver the evidence that would blow apart their carefully constructed criminal enterprise. Where to now, Mrs. Vasquez? Ramon asked, using Maria's surname for me as instructed. The Tribune building, please, I replied, settling Chloe beside me in the back seat. And if you notice anyone following us, please take evasive action. Ramon's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, a flash of understanding passing between us. Certainly. Senora, I know this city better than the rats know the sewers. No one will follow us for long. As we pulled away from the curb, I held Chloe's hand tightly, drawing strength from her trust in me. The next hour would determine whether Daniel's dangerous gambit would succeed, or whether all three of us would become casualties of corporate corruption too powerful to challenge. Either way, there was no turning back now. Ramon proved as good as his word, executing a series of sudden turns, doubling back on one-way streets, and even briefly pulling into a hotel parking garage only to exit through a different ramp. Through it all, Chloe remained calm, treating the evasive driving as part of our adventure rather than a desperate attempt to lose potential pursuers. I think we're clear, Ramon finally announced, his eyes constantly checking his mirrors as we approached the imposing Tribune Tower. But I will circle the block after I drop you off, just to be certain. Thank you, I said, meaning it more deeply than the simple words could convey. We shouldn't be long, an hour at most. I will be waiting. Senora, Maria would never forgive me if I abandoned her favorite teacher. The Gothic architecture of the Tribune building had always impressed me during previous visits to downtown, its flying buttresses and ornate stonework reminiscent of medieval European cathedrals. Today, it represented something more immediate potential salvation. Holding Chloe's hand firmly, I approached the security desk in the lobby, conscious of the precious cargo in my handbag. I have an appointment with Thomas Reynolds, I told the guard, trying to project casual confidence rather than the nervous energy thrumming through me. The guard checked a computer screen. I don't see anything scheduled. My heart sank. Had Daniel's arrangement somehow fallen through? Before I could respond, the guard's phone rang. He answered, listened briefly, then looked up at me with new interest. Are you Mrs. Wilson? I nodded, suddenly wary. Mr. Beer Reynolds says to send you up immediately, 18th floor, suite 1823. Relief flooded through me as the guard issued temporary visitor badges and directed us to the elevator bank. Inside the elevator, Chloe looked up at me with curious eyes. Is this the person who's going to help Daddy? I hope so, sweetheart, I replied, straightening her jacket and smoothing her hair, small maternal gestures that comforted me as much as her. Remember, we need to be careful about what we say. The 18th floor housed the investigative reporting department, a maze of cubicles and glass-walled offices humming with activity. A young assistant met us at the elevator and escorted us directly to a corner office where a man in his early 40s stood waiting. His shirt sleeves rolled up and tie loosened the universal uniform of journalists on deadline. Mrs. Wilson, he said, extending his hand. Thomas Reynolds, I've been expecting you, though I was beginning to worry. We had to take certain precautions, I explained, shaking his hand before introducing Chloe. Reynolds' expression softened as he greeted my granddaughter, offering her a juice box from a small refrigerator in his office before turning back to me with renewed seriousness. Daniel contacted me 3 weeks ago. He explained once we were seated and Chloe was occupied with a pad of paper and colored pencils the assistant had provided. He said he had evidence of massive financial crimes involving Global Meridian, but needed time to compile everything and create secure backups. He leaned forward. Then he suddenly went silent 2 days ago. When my sources told me he'd boarded a plane to London yesterday, I assumed the worst, that he'd been compromised or scared off. Neither, I said, opening my handbag to extract the envelope and USB drives. He had to leave to protect himself, but he made arrangements to get everything to you through us. Reynolds' eyes widened as I placed the items on his desk. This is significant and potentially very dangerous for you. Did Daniel explain exactly what he uncovered? Money laundering for criminal organizations, illegal weapons deals, corruption extending into regulatory agencies. I kept my voice low despite the closed door. I saw enough to understand why people might kill to keep it hidden. He nodded grimly. Global Meridian handles billions in investments, including pension funds for several state governments and major unions. If they've been using that legitimate business as cover for criminal enterprises. He left the implications hanging. How quickly can you publish? I asked, glancing at Chloe to ensure she remained absorbed in her drawing. I'll need to verify key documents, run everything past our legal team, and get editorial approval. Reynolds was already examining the drives, his expression shifting from professional interest to something approaching awe as he scanned the contents. This is extraordinarily comprehensive. Daniel didn't leave many loose ends. That's how he's always been, I said, a surge of maternal pride mixing with fear for my methodical, principled son. Thorough to a fault. With this level of documentation, we could publish an initial story online by tomorrow, print edition the following day. He looked up from his computer. But you and your granddaughter shouldn't be anywhere near Chicago when that happens. These people will be desperate once they realize what's coming. We're leaving as soon as we finish here, I assured him. Daniel suggested a location where we can lay low until things settle. Reynolds nodded, then hesitated. Mrs. Wilson, I've been investigating corporate corruption for 15 years. What your son has uncovered here isn't just unusual, it's unprecedented in its scope and the level of detail he managed to document. When this story breaks, it will trigger investigations in multiple countries, stock market chaos, probably congressional hearings. He trailed off, seemingly overwhelmed by the implications. Will it be enough? I asked, the teacher in me needing to know that this risk to my son, to Chloe, to our safety and future would accomplish its purpose. Will they be held accountable? Some will, the highest profile executives, certainly some of the government officials implicated. His expression turned realistic rather than reassuring. But systems this corrupt have self-preservation mechanisms. Some people will escape consequences. That's just the reality. I absorbed this with a nod, having taught enough history to understand how power protects itself. As long as it stops the worst of it, the weapons deals, the money laundering for terrorists, that has to end. It will, Reynolds promised. This story will make that inevitable. A knock at the door interrupted us. Reynolds' assistant poked her head in, her expression tense. There are 2 men in the lobby asking for security clearance to come up. They claim to be federal agents investigating financial crimes, but something seems off. Security is stalling them, but they're being insistent. Reynolds' reaction was immediate. We need to move you now. Is there anything else Daniel wanted me to know? I shook my head, gathering my belongings, while Reynolds quickly copied the drive's contents to his secure server. There's a service elevator that leads to the loading dock, he explained, returning the original drives to me. My assistant will take you down. I'll handle our visitors and buy you time. He crouched briefly to Chloe's level. It was very nice meeting you, young lady. You and your grandmother are doing something very brave and important today. Chloe smiled shyly. My daddy says sometimes you have to be brave even when you're scared. Your daddy is a wise man, Reynolds replied, a flicker of emotion crossing his face before he turned back to me. Go now. I'll contact you through the secure channel Daniel established once the story is published. The assistant led us through a maze of hallways to a freight elevator tucked at the back of the floor. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of 2 men in dark suits stepping off the main elevator, their expressions grim and purposeful. We had escaped by mere moments. The loading dock buzzed with activity delivery trucks arriving with paper supplies, cafeteria deliveries, mailroom staff sorting packages. We slipped through the organized chaos unnoticed, emerging onto a side street away from the main entrance. Ramon's taxi waited exactly where he had promised, 2 blocks south. As we hurried toward it, I fought the urge to look over my shoulder, knowing that appearing nervous would only draw attention we couldn't afford. "Did you finish your treasure hunt, little one?" Ramon asked as we settled into the back seat. "Not yet," Chloe replied seriously. "We have one more place to go." "Then let us go there," he said, pulling smoothly into traffic. "Where to, Senora?" I hesitated only briefly. "We need to leave the city. Head north toward Wisconsin. I'll direct you as we go." As Chicago's skyline receded in the rear window, I pulled Chloe close, allowing myself a moment of cautious optimism. We had completed Daniel's mission. The evidence was in capable hands, soon to be public knowledge that couldn't be buried or denied. Now we just needed to disappear until the storm passed. "Grandma," Chloe whispered against my side, "are we winning our game?" I stroked her hair, measuring my response carefully. "We're doing very well, sweetheart. Very well indeed." What I didn't tell her was that in games like this one, games where powerful people stood to lose everything, the most dangerous moment often comes right before victory. We had landed a blow against our opponents, but they were far from defeated. And like wounded predators, they would be at their most dangerous now. The Illinois countryside unfolded beyond our windows as Ramon's taxi left the suburban sprawl behind. Familiar landscapes transformed into foreign territory through the lens of our new reality. Every police car became a potential threat. Every black SUV a possible pursuer. I directed Ramon to avoid major highways, choosing instead the network of state and county roads that would make our journey longer but less predictable. "We should stop soon," I told him after we'd been driving for nearly 2 hours. "You've done more than enough, and I don't want to take you too far from your regular work." Ramon shook his head firmly. "Maria told me to help you, however needed. Besides, I have my nephew covering my shifts today. Where exactly are we going?" I hesitated, balancing trust against caution. "A cabin in northern Michigan, near Cedar Lake." "Michigan is far, Senora." "At least 6 more hours, especially on these back roads." "I know. We'll find another way from here." I glanced at Chloe, who had fallen asleep against my side, emotionally exhausted from our morning's adventures. "Perhaps a bus or—" "I have a better idea," Ramon interrupted, meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. "My brother-in-law runs a small trucking company. They have a delivery going to Traverse City today. The driver is my cousin, Eduardo. He could take you most of the way." The offer was tempting. Truckers moved across state lines with minimal scrutiny, and the randomness of connecting with a vehicle already making the journey would be nearly impossible for pursuers to anticipate. Yet I hesitated, reluctant to involve more people in our dangerous situation. Ramon seemed to read my thoughts. "Eduardo asks no questions. He has made many such special deliveries for family and friends needing to travel quietly." I didn't press for details. The immigrant community had its own reasons for sometimes needing to move people discreetly, reasons I had come to understand and respect during my years working with Maria and her extended family. "If you're sure he wouldn't mind," I said finally. Ramon made a call in rapid Spanish, too quick for my limited vocabulary to follow. After a brief conversation, he nodded with satisfaction. "It is arranged. Eduardo will meet us at a truck stop near Rockford in 1 hour. He delivers furniture to stores in northern Michigan. You and the little one can ride in the cab with him. Very comfortable, very safe." I squeezed his shoulder in gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you and Maria properly." "You helped Maria's daughter get a college scholarship years ago," he replied simply. "In our family, we do not forget such kindnesses." The truck stop buzzed with the rhythms of highway commerce, big rigs refueling, drivers grabbing meals and coffee, travelers stretching their legs. I used some of Daniel's cash to buy supplies, sandwiches, drinks, snacks for the journey ahead, plus a small backpack, basic toiletries, and a coloring book with crayons for Chloe. Eduardo's truck was exactly as promised, a large commercial vehicle transporting furniture to retailers across Michigan. The driver himself was a barrel-chested man with a salt and pepper beard and gentle eyes that crinkled when he smiled at Chloe. "Ramon says you need to reach Cedar Lake," he said after brief introductions. "I deliver in Traverse City, about 45 minutes south of there." "Close enough, yes." "Perfect," I agreed, relieved beyond measure. "And you're sure we're not imposing?" Eduardo waved away my concern. "The company pays for the fuel no matter what. Having passengers makes the journey less lonely." He grinned at Chloe. especially passengers who might enjoy hearing truck driver stories. After tearful thanks and promises to let Maria know when we were safe, we parted ways with Ramon. Eduardo helped us into the surprisingly spacious cab of his truck, showing Chloe the elevated sleeping compartment behind the seats that delighted her with its compact efficiency. "Like a little house on wheels," she exclaimed, bouncing slightly on the narrow bunk. As the massive truck rumbled onto the highway, I felt some of the tension ease from my shoulders. We were moving further from danger with each mile, hidden within the anonymous flow of commercial traffic crisscrossing the country. For the first time since hearing Chloe's whispered warning at the airport, I allowed myself to take a full, deep breath. Eduardo proved a considerate companion, entertaining Chloe with carefully edited tales from his 20 years on the road while giving me space to process our situation. When he noticed my fatigue, he insisted I rest in the sleeping compartment while he and Chloe continued their conversation in the front seats. I must have fallen into a deeper sleep than intended, because when I woke, the quality of light had changed dramatically. Golden afternoon sunshine slanted through the windows, and the landscape outside had transformed from Illinois farmland to the denser forests of Michigan. "Almost at Traverse City," Eduardo informed me as I rejoined them. "Another hour, perhaps." Chloe was coloring contentedly, her previous fear seemingly forgotten in the adventure of riding in a big truck. I checked the prepaid phone from the safety deposit box. Still no messages, which was both reassuring and concerning. Had Daniel reached London safely? Was he still in danger? "Can I ask a favor?" I said to Eduardo. "Could you perhaps find a news station on the radio I need to check if there's any relevant information?" He nodded knowingly, tuning the radio to a news channel where a broadcaster was mid-sentence, stock plunging amid rumors of a major investigative report set to be published tomorrow. Global Meridian Investments has issued a statement denying any impropriety and calling the rumors baseless attacks designed to manipulate markets. Trading was temporarily halted after shares dropped 20% in afternoon trading. Financial analysts are speculating about Eduardo changed the station at my request, but the damage was done. Word was already leaking. The Tribune must have begun reaching out to Global Meridian for comment, setting the standard journalistic practice of allowing subjects to respond before publication. It also meant our pursuers now knew exactly what was coming. "Bad news?" Eduardo asked quietly, his eyes flicking meaningfully toward Chloe to indicate he wouldn't speak plainly in front of her. "Complicated news," I replied, "but it confirms we need to reach our destination as quickly as possible." He nodded, pressing the accelerator slightly. "I know some shortcuts." The late afternoon sun was casting long shadows when Eduardo finally pulled his truck into a small roadside diner about 30 miles north of Traverse City. "This is as far as my route allows," he explained apologetically. "But the owner here, Maggie, she can help. Her son drives a logging truck up near Cedar Lake." More connections, more strangers' kindness. It was as if Daniel's trail of breadcrumbs had been supplemented by an unexpected network of support, materializing when we needed it most. Maggie proved to be a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who asked few questions after Eduardo's brief private explanation. Within an hour, her son Derek had arrived in his pickup truck, ready to drive us the final leg to Cedar Lake. As we thanked Eduardo and prepared to transfer to Derek's vehicle, Chloe suddenly wrapped her arms around the truck driver's massive leg. "Thank you for the stories," she said solemnly, "and for helping us with our game." Eduardo knelt to her level, his weathered face gentle. "You are very welcome, little one. You be good for your abuela. Yes, she is very brave." The simple words caught in my chest, not because they were particularly profound, but because they reflected how completely our reality had shifted. 2 days ago, I had been a retired teacher looking forward to a quiet week with my granddaughter while my son traveled for business. Now strangers were calling me brave as they helped us flee from dangerous men. As Derek's pickup rumbled north toward Cedar Lake and Daniel's promised sanctuary, I wondered if I was, in fact, brave or simply a grandmother with no other choice but to keep moving forward, one step at a time, toward whatever awaited us at the end of this increasingly dangerous road. Cedar Lake materialized from the gathering dusk like a memory taking physical form, a smooth expanse of water reflecting the deepening blue of the evening sky, surrounded by dense pine forests that had been my husband James's sanctuary for decades before his death. The small log cabin that had served as base camp for countless father-son fishing expeditions stood on a gentle rise overlooking the water, its windows dark and shuttered. Derek pulled his truck to a stop at the end of the rutted dirt road about 50 yards from the cabin. "This is as close as I can get," he explained. "Road washes out every spring, and no one's bothered to improve it." "This is perfect," I assured him, gathering our meager supplies. "You've been incredibly kind." He shrugged off my thanks with the casual modesty I was coming to associate with this impromptu underground railroad that had carried us from Chicago to northern Michigan. Mom wouldn't have it any other way. "You need anything while you're up here? There's a radio in the cabin. Channel 3 reaches our house if reception's good." He hesitated, then added, "Whatever trouble you're in, ma'am, I hope it passes soon." I nodded my appreciation, helping a sleepy Chloe from the truck. We watched Derek's taillights disappear down the narrow road before turning toward the cabin that would be our refuge for how long days, weeks Daniel's instructions hadn't specified. And I realized with a slight chill that we were now truly on our own, cut off from both pursuers and allies. "Is this where Daddy and Grandpa used to fish?" Chloe asked, suddenly more alert as she took in our surroundings. "Yes, sweetheart. They came here every summer when your dad was about your age." "Did you come too?" I shook my head, a bittersweet smile forming. "No, this was their special place. Just for them. I only came once, to help your grandpa close it up for winter the year before he died." That had been nearly 15 years ago, yet I remembered exactly where James had hidden the spare key beneath a distinctive red-streaked rock beside the back porch steps. Remarkably, it was still there, exactly as Daniel had promised in his note. The cabin's interior was simple but well-maintained, a main room with a stone fireplace, small kitchen area, 2 bedrooms, and a basic bathroom with a shower that pulled water from the lake. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but otherwise, it appeared that someone, likely Daniel, had ensured the place remained in good repair over the years. "It smells like pine trees inside, too," Chloe observed as I lit the propane lamps, their warm glow creating dancing shadows on the log walls. "Your grandfather loved the smell of pine," I told her, grateful for the distraction of practical tasks, checking the propane tank, starting the generator for electricity, finding linens for the beds. He said it cleared his mind better than any medicine. Working together, we soon had the cabin reasonably comfortable. I located the promised radio and tested it briefly, receiving only static but confirming it had power. The kitchen cupboards contained basics canned goods, pasta, rice supplemented by the supplies we'd purchased at the truck stop. We would need to venture out for fresh food eventually, but not immediately. Once Chloe was fed, bathed, and tucked into one of the narrow beds in the smaller bedroom, I allowed myself to truly consider our situation for the first time. The prepaid phone from the safety deposit box remained silent. No emergency contact from Daniel. The cabin had no television or internet connection, leaving us completely isolated from news about either the Tribune's exposé or its fallout. I found myself standing at the window overlooking the lake, watching moonlight ripple across its surface, trying to quiet the questions circling in my mind. Had Thomas Reynolds successfully published the story? Had Global Meridian figured out who had delivered their secrets to the press? Was Daniel safe in London? Or had their reach extended across oceans? My reflection in the glass startled me, a tired-looking woman with silver hair and worried eyes. So different from the confident teacher who had accompanied her son and granddaughter to the airport just 36 hours earlier. That woman had lived in a world of lesson plans and book clubs, grocery lists and birthday cards. This woman existed in a shadow realm of coded messages and safe houses, pursued by nameless threats. A soft sound behind me broke my reverie, Chloe padding into the main room in her borrowed pajamas. Mr. Whiskers clutched to her chest. "I can't sleep," she said simply. "The bed feels funny." I opened my arms, and she came to me without hesitation, her small body warm against mine as I lifted her onto my lap in the old rocking chair beside the fireplace. "It's a new place," I acknowledged. "It takes time to get used to new places. When is Daddy coming back?" The question held no whine or complaint, just a child's straightforward desire to understand. I chose my words carefully. "As soon as he finishes his important work, he's counting on us to be brave and patient while he's gone." "Is he fighting bad guys like in my books?" The simple question captured the essence of our situation with unexpected clarity. "In a way, yes. Your dad discovered that some people at his company were doing very wrong things that hurt others. He's making sure they can't keep doing those things." Chloe nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. "That's why the men at the airport wanted to stop us, because we had Daddy's secret evidence." I shouldn't have been surprised by her comprehension. Children absorb far more than adults often credit, but her matter-of-fact summary still caught me off guard. Yes, I admitted. But we did exactly what your father asked us to do. We got the evidence to the right person, and now everyone will know the truth. And then we can go home. Home? The innocent question pierced my heart. I had no idea if we would ever return to our previous lives. If the exposure of Global Meridian's crimes would ensure our safety or mark us permanently as targets. The truth was, I didn't know what home would look like after this. We'll be with your dad again, I promised instead. That's what matters most. She accepted this, her eyelids growing heavy as I rocked gently back and forth. Within minutes, she had drifted back to sleep, her breathing deep and even, face peaceful in the lamplight. I continued rocking, reluctant to disturb her rest by moving her back to bed. Outside, an owl called across the lake, a haunting sound that seemed to echo the uncertainty of our future. Yet in that moment, with Chloe's trusting weight against me, I felt an unexpected clarity of purpose. Whatever came next, whatever challenges or dangers we still faced, I would protect this child. Not just because she was my granddaughter or because Daniel had entrusted her to my care, but because in a world where powerful people could casually authorize weapons deals that would kill thousands or launder money for terrorists, protecting innocence and truth became an act of defiance. I had spent decades teaching students about historical moments when ordinary people faced extraordinary choices. Now, in the quiet of a remote cabin with a sleeping child in my arms, I realized I had become one of those people, thrust by circumstance into a moment that would define not just my life, but potentially many others. The thought was terrifying and somehow strangely empowering. Morning arrived with startling beauty sunlight filtering through pine boughs, casting dappled patterns across the cabin floor, while birdsong filled the air outside. For a disorienting moment, I could almost believe we were simply on vacation, that Daniel would emerge from the second bedroom yawning and asking about breakfast, that our greatest concern would be whether the fish were biting today. Reality reasserted itself when I automatically scanned the tree line for any sign of unexpected movement. Old habits from a mere 2 days of life on the run already ingrained as if I'd lived this way for years. Chloe, however, embraced our new environment with the adaptability of childhood. After a breakfast of oatmeal and canned peaches, she explored the cabin with delight, discovering fishing tackle in a closet, board games with missing pieces under a bed, and a collection of field guides to local wildlife that captured her immediate interest. "Grandma, can we go looking for birds?" she asked, showing me detailed illustrations of chickadees and nuthatches. "The book says there are lots here." I hesitated, torn between caution and the need to maintain some semblance of normality for her sake. The cabin was isolated, the nearest neighbor at least a mile away according to my memory of James's descriptions. Surely a short walk along the lake shore would be safe enough. "We'll stay close to the cabin," I decided, helping her into her jacket. "And if I say we need to go back, we go immediately. No questions." She nodded solemnly, accepting these terms with the seriousness of our ongoing game. Together we ventured outside, keeping to the tree line where we could quickly retreat to cover if necessary. The spring air carried a lingering chill, but sunshine warmed our faces as we walked slowly along the shore, Chloe clutching her bird guide and pointing excitedly at each flutter of wings. I found myself simultaneously hypervigilant and oddly at peace, scanning constantly for threats while absorbing the simple joy of watching my granddaughter discover something new. Was this how mothers in war zones felt during brief moments of normality? This dissonant blend of danger and domestic tranquility. We had identified 7 different bird species and collected an assortment of interesting rocks when the distant sound of a vehicle engine sent ice through my veins. I grabbed Chloe's hand, pulling her toward the trees. "Inside, now," I whispered, all senses suddenly heightened. We hurried back to the cabin, entering through the rear door and securing it behind us. I positioned Chloe in the smaller bedroom away from windows. "Stay here until I come get you," I instructed, keeping my voice calm despite the pounding of my heart. "Remember how we practiced being very quiet?" She nodded, clutching Mr. Whiskers tightly, her eyes wide but trusting. I moved silently to the front window, positioning myself to see without being seen. A pickup truck, older model, rusted around the wheel wells, had stopped at the end of the dirt road. A single figure emerged, an older man in flannel and work boots carrying what appeared to be a paper grocery bag. Relief flooded through me as I recognized Derek's description of his father, the property caretaker who checked on the cabin periodically. Still, I maintained caution, watching as he approached and knocked firmly on the front door. "Mrs. Wilson," he called. "It's Jim Lawson. Derek sent me with some supplies." I retrieved Chloe before answering, unwilling to let her out of my sight even for a moment. Together, we opened the door to find a weathered man in his 70s with kind eyes and a face creased from decades of outdoor work. "Didn't mean to startle you folks," he said, holding out the grocery bag. "Derek mentioned you might need some fresh things. Milk, eggs, bread. My wife sent along a casserole, too." "That's incredibly thoughtful," I said, accepting the bag gratefully. "Please thank her for us." Jim nodded, his eyes taking in the cabin with professional assessment. "Place holding up okay. Haven't been up to check it much this past winter." "It's perfect," I assured him. "Your maintenance has kept it in wonderful condition." He seemed pleased by this, then hesitated before adding, "Don't mean to pry, ma'am, but Derek mentioned you might be in some kind of trouble. Anything we should be watching for strangers asking questions. That sort of thing." The direct question caught me off guard, but his straightforward manner suggested genuine concern rather than prying curiosity. "It's complicated," I admitted. "But yes, there might be people looking for us." "If anyone asks, nobody's seen you." He finished with a knowing nod. "That's what I figured. Folks around here mind their own business, but we look out for each other, too." He glanced at Chloe, who was half hidden behind my legs. "You two sit tight. I'll swing by every couple days with supplies. Anything specific you need. Just leave a note under that flower pot on the porch." After he departed, I found myself unexpectedly moved by this continued chain of kindnesses from strangers, each person doing their small part without demanding explanations or passing judgment. It stood in stark contrast to the corporate criminals Daniel had exposed, whose massive resources and connections were being used to protect their ability to profit from suffering. The day passed slowly, marked by simple activities to keep Chloe engaged: board games, reading from the cabin's small collection of paperbacks, identifying more birds through the windows. I rationed our use of the generator to preserve fuel, relying instead on natural light and propane lamps as evening approached. After dinner, I tried the radio again, this time successfully connecting to the frequency Derek had mentioned. His voice crackled through the static, confirming that his father had made contact and asking if we needed anything else. I requested newspapers, any national publications they could find, and he promised to send them with the next supply delivery. Night fell, bringing with it a profound silence unlike anything in our suburban life. I put Chloe to bed with another story about her father's childhood fishing adventures at this very lake, then settled into the rocking chair with a kerosene lamp, one of James's old mystery novels open in my lap, though my eyes rarely focused on the words. Around midnight, the prepaid phone finally chirped. A single text message from an unlisted number, story published. Global Meridian stock suspended. FBI raided headquarters. Stay put. Contact coming in 3 days. All safe for now. The terse message told me nothing about Daniel's personal safety, but confirmed our mission had succeeded. Thomas Reynolds had published the expose, and the wheels of justice, however imperfect, had begun to turn. I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction before the implications of contact coming in 3 days registered. Someone would be arriving at the cabin, someone Daniel trusted enough to send to us. 3 more days of waiting, of jumping at every sound, of maintaining a brave face for Chloe while my own anxiety simmered beneath the surface. 3 more days before we would learn what came next in this unexpected chapter of our lives. I checked all doors and windows one final time before attempting sleep. The loaded rifle I'd found in the cabin's closet now propped beside my bed. James had taught me to shoot decades ago, a skill I'd never imagined needing until now. As I drifted toward uneasy sleep, I found myself cataloging the changes in myself since that moment at the airport. The Amanda Wilson who had arrived at this cabin was not the same woman who had heard her granddaughter's whispered warning. That woman had lived a life defined by predictable routines and reasonable expectations. This woman, the one lying awake with a rifle within reach, had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed: decisiveness under pressure, strategic thinking, the ability to navigate danger while protecting what mattered most. Whether these changes were improvements or simply necessary adaptations to extraordinary circumstances remained to be seen. But as I finally succumbed to exhaustion, one certainty remained: I was no longer merely reacting to events beyond my control. I was becoming an active participant in whatever story was still unfolding, for better or worse. The newspapers arrived the following day, delivered by Jim along with more supplies and a battery-powered radio. The headlines confirmed what the text message had suggested. Global Meridian implicated in massive financial crimes dominated the front pages, accompanied by photos of FBI agents carrying boxes from the company's Chicago headquarters. Thomas Reynolds' byline appeared prominently, his carefully crafted exposé laying out the evidence Daniel had gathered with devastating precision. The article detailed money laundering operations for drug cartels and terrorist organizations, illegal weapons deals that violated international sanctions, and systematic bribery of regulatory officials. Several high-ranking executives had already been arrested, while others, including the CEO, were reportedly cooperating with federal authorities in exchange for leniency. "Is that Daddy's company?" Chloe asked, peering over my shoulder at the newspaper spread across the kitchen table. "Yes," I answered quickly, folding the paper to hide the more disturbing details. "Your father helped the reporters understand some very complicated things that were happening there." She nodded, accepting this simplified explanation. "That's why we're having our adventure, so the bad guys couldn't stop him." "Exactly," I confirmed, once again impressed by her perception. "And it worked. Your dad's evidence is helping a lot of people now." The days passed with agonizing slowness, our isolation both protection and prison. I maintained a routine for Chloe's sake: meals at regular times, nature walks staying close to the cabin, reading and games in the evenings. The battery radio brought news updates that I listened to after she was asleep, absorbing the growing scandal as Global Meridian's crimes captured national attention. Congressional hearings were being scheduled. International arrest warrants had been issued for executives who had fled the country. Client funds were frozen pending investigation. Yet nowhere in the coverage was there any mention of Robert Wilson, the whistleblower who had made it all possible, a deliberate omission, I assumed, to protect him from retaliation. On the morning of the third day, I woke before dawn, tension coiling through me at the prospect of our expected visitor. Who would Daniel send? How would they find us? What news would they bring? I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that would allow for quick movement if necessary, and positioned myself on the porch with a cup of coffee and James's old binoculars. Chloe still slept peacefully inside, unaware of the significance of this particular day. The sun had just cleared the tree line when I spotted movement on the dirt road, not a vehicle but a single figure on foot approaching steadily. I retrieved the rifle from inside the door, keeping it visible but not directly aimed. As the visitor drew closer, the morning mist partially obscured their features, but I could make out a woman of medium height carrying a backpack, dressed for hiking in practical boots and layers. As she came within 50 yards, recognition hit me like a physical blow. Catherine Wilson, Daniel's ex-wife and Chloe's mother. I lowered the rifle immediately, shock and confusion warring within me. Catherine had moved to California after the divorce 2 years ago, establishing a new life that included minimal involvement with her daughter. Monthly video calls and holiday visits constituted the extent of her parenting, with primary custody granted to Daniel and me serving as secondary caregiver when his work required travel. "Amanda," she called, raising a hand in greeting as she approached the porch. "It's just me." I set the rifle aside, moving to meet her at the bottom of the steps. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her normally immaculate appearance rumpled from travel. "Catherine," I responded, still processing her unexpected arrival. "How did you—" "Daniel arranged everything," she interrupted, dropping her backpack to the ground. "He contacted me 5 days ago, explained what was happening. I've been traveling under a false name, using cash only, changing transportation methods every few hours." A humorless laugh escaped her. Apparently those crime novels he always read came in handy for planning fugitive logistics. Before I could respond, the cabin door flew open, and Chloe burst onto the porch, her face transforming with disbelieving joy. "Mommy," she cried, practically tumbling down the steps in her haste. Catherine knelt, opening her arms as Chloe crashed into her embrace. "Hey, Bug," she said, using the nickname she'd given her daughter as an infant. "I've missed you so much." I stepped back, giving them space for their reunion while trying to realign my understanding of our situation. Catherine's presence changed everything, raised new questions, created new possibilities and complications. After the emotional greetings subsided, we moved inside where Catherine accepted coffee and began filling in the considerable gaps in my understanding. Daniel contacted me through an old email account we kept for emergencies, she explained, warming her hands on the mug. He knew they'd be monitoring his usual communications, but this address was from before we were married. No connection to his current identity. He told you everything? I asked, still processing the implications. She nodded. About the money laundering, the weapons deals, all of it. He said he couldn't warn you directly because they were watching him too closely. But he knew you'd protect Chloe if he gave her the right instructions. A flicker of something regret, shame crossed her face. He trusted you completely. Amanda said you were the strongest person he knew. Chloe had settled against her mother's side, clearly unwilling to break physical contact after their long separation. I sent her to wash up and change clothes, needing a moment to speak with Catherine privately. Where is he now? I asked once Chloe was out of earshot. Is he safe? Catherine glanced toward the hallway before lowering her voice. He never went to London. The ticket was a diversion. He's been in Canada working with international authorities to track the offshore accounts. She hesitated, then continued. The reason he sent me here is, we need to move. All of us. Tonight. The calm I'd cultivated over the past days shattered instantly. Why, what's happened? The investigation is revealing connections beyond what even Daniel anticipated. Government officials, intelligence agencies, foreign interests all compromised. Some very powerful people are facing prison or worse. And they've traced the leak back to Daniel. Her eyes met mine, fear evident despite her controlled tone. They've identified his family as leverage. There was an incident at my apartment in California. Men broke in, ransacked the place. Daniel's contact in the FBI says they're narrowing the search, focusing on properties with family connections. Cold dread settled in my stomach. This cabin is registered to James's estate, she confirmed grimly. It's only a matter of time before they find it in property records. Daniel says we have to leave tonight. Meet his contact at the Canadian border. They have new identities prepared. A place for us to stay until the immediate danger passes. The magnitude of what she was describing abandoning our entire lives, possibly permanently struck me with physical force. I sank into a chair, trying to process this new reality. How long, I managed finally. How long until we can come back? Catherine's expression softened with sympathy. Daniel doesn't know. Months at minimum, possibly longer. The unspoken possibly never hung in the air between us. I thought of my home filled with decades of memories, my friends, the community I'd built over a lifetime. All of it potentially lost because my son had chosen to expose corruption at the highest levels. I know it's overwhelming, Catherine said quietly, but we don't have a choice. Amanda, these people have reached the desperate stage where they have nothing left to lose. If they can't silence Daniel directly, they'll use us to force his hand. I looked toward the hallway where Chloe's happy humming drifted from the bathroom, blissfully unaware that her world was about to be upended yet again. Then we leave tonight, I say, he said, my resolve hardening around the one certainty that remained constant through all these changes. Protecting my family came before everything else. Tell me what we need to do. Dusk settled over Cedar Lake as we made our final preparations. Catherine's instructions were precise. Take only what we could carry in backpacks. Dress in layers. Bring the minimum identification necessary. Everything else would be left behind. The cabin itself would be made to look temporarily abandoned rather than hastily fled, buying us precious time if our pursuers tracked us this far. I moved through the small rooms with bittersweet efficiency, erasing traces of our presence while preserving the illusion that we might return any day. Beds were left rumpled but not stripped. Dishes were washed but left in the drying rack. Fishing gear was positioned near the door as if ready for tomorrow's expedition. Grandma, why do we have to leave at night? Chloe asked as I helped her pack her few belongings. Isn't it harder to see? That's exactly why, I explained, folding her extra sweater into a compact bundle. Sometimes it's safer when people can't see you clearly, like hide and seek in the dark. Very much like that, I agreed, grateful for her ability to frame our desperate flight as another phase of our ongoing game. Catherine entered with an armful of food items packed into Ziploc bags. The contact says to bring provisions for 24 hours. We'll have about a 6-hour hike to reach the rendezvous point. 6 hours through the forest at night. I couldn't keep the concern from my voice. With a 7-year-old, Daniel planned the route carefully, she assured me. It follows game trails most of the way, avoids major elevation changes, and keeps to terrain that's manageable even in low light. He used to hunt in these woods with his father. I did remember James and Daniel disappearing for weekends during deer season, returning with detailed stories of their woodland adventures, regardless of whether they'd actually caught anything. Those expeditions had given my son an intimate knowledge of the backcountry that now might save our lives. The alternative is driving, Catherine continued, which means roads, checkpoints, potential witnesses. The Canadian border is surprisingly porous in these remote areas if you know where to cross on foot. The casual way she referenced illegal border crossing highlighted how completely our world had shifted. 3 weeks ago, I would have been appalled at the suggestion. Now it seemed not just reasonable but necessary. By 10:00, darkness had fully claimed the forest. We doused all lights in the cabin and waited another hour to ensure our night vision was fully adjusted before beginning our journey. Chloe, initially excited by the prospect of a night adventure, had grown quieter as the reality of leaving the cabin's safety set in. "Will we ever come back here?" she asked as I adjusted her small backpack over her shoulders. The question pierced me with its simple directness. I considered offering reassurance, then decided on honesty instead. "I don't know, sweetheart, but what matters most is that we're together. You, me, and your mom. Places can be left behind, but people are what make a real home." She absorbed this with characteristic seriousness, then reached for my hand. "I'm ready." Catherine led the way, navigating with a red-filtered headlamp that preserved our night vision while providing just enough illumination to follow the narrow trail. I took the rear position with Chloe between us. The forest enveloped us immediately, a dense world of sounds and scents accentuated by the darkness. Owls called overhead. Small creatures rustled in the underbrush, and the sweet, resinous scent of pine surrounded us like nature's perfume. We moved slowly but steadily, stopping every 30 minutes for brief rests and water. Chloe maintained an impressive pace for her age, though I could see fatigue beginning to show after the second hour. Without complaint, Catherine lifted her onto her back for stretches of the journey, mother and daughter working together with a synchronicity that belied their typically distant relationship. Near the halfway point, Catherine called a longer break beside a small stream. As Chloe dozed against my shoulder, Catherine and I shared a moment of unexpected connection. "I've been a terrible mother," she said quietly, staring into the darkness beyond our small circle of filtered light. "Pursuing my career in California while Daniel raised our daughter." "You made choices that seemed right at the time," I replied, surprised by her sudden vulnerability. She shook her head. "I abandoned them." Let's call it what it was. Her voice carried no self-pity, just stark assessment. I told myself Chloe was better off with Daniel, that he was always the more natural parent, that I was building a better future by establishing my practice. That weekly video calls were enough. A bitter laugh escaped her. Now look at us. No careers, no homes, running for our lives because Daniel had the courage to do the right thing when I was busy building my perfect life 3,000 miles away. I considered her words carefully before responding. "We all have regrets, Catherine, but right now, you're here when it matters most. That counts for something." "Does it?" she asked, genuine uncertainty in her voice. "Can you repair years of absence in a crisis?" "You'd be surprised what crisis reveals about relationships," I offered. "When everything else is stripped away, the core either holds or it doesn't." Our conversation ended as Chloe stirred, and we resumed our journey with renewed purpose. The night deepened around us, the forest growing denser as we moved further from established trails. Twice Catherine paused to consult a hand-drawn map, making slight adjustments to our course. Near dawn, we reached a small clearing where the trees thinned enough to reveal the first hints of approaching daylight. Catherine checked her watch and nodded with satisfaction. "We're making good time. The rendezvous point is about 40 minutes ahead, a small hunting cabin just south of the border. From there, our contact will guide us across into transportation on the Canadian side." "Who is this contact?" I asked, the question that had been bothering me for hours finally surfacing. "How can Daniel be certain they're trustworthy?" "He wouldn't tell me. Said it was safer if I didn't know until we met them." She adjusted her pack, grimacing slightly at the weight. "But he was confident. Said it was someone from his past that he trusted with his life and ours. We pushed forward as the forest gradually brightened around us, birds awakening to greet the new day with chorus. Chloe, initially energized by the approaching dawn, began to flag noticeably. I carried her for the final stretch, her small body heavy against my back, her trust a greater weight on my heart. The hunting cabin appeared suddenly a crude one-room structure nearly reclaimed by the surrounding vegetation. No smoke rose from its chimney, no light shone from its single window, but Catherine approached with confidence. "Hello," she called softly, tapping lightly on the weathered door. "We're the Wilson family," silence answered, stretching uncomfortably until I began to wonder if we'd somehow missed our connection. Then the door creaked open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the dim interior. "Right on time," a woman's voice observed, stepping into the morning light. "Daniel said you'd be punctual." Recognition hit me with the force of a physical blow. The woman, slim, athletic, with gray-streaked dark hair cropped short, had aged 2 decades since I'd last seen her, but her identity was unmistakable. "Jessica," I whispered, nearly stumbling in shock. Jessica Blackwell, Daniel's college girlfriend, who had abruptly disappeared from his life during their senior year after being recruited by an unnamed government agency, the relationship that had broken my son's heart and set him on a completely different life path than he'd planned. "Hello, Amanda," she replied with a slight smile. "It's been a long time." "You know each other?" Catherine asked, confusion evident in her voice. "We did once," Jessica confirmed, gesturing us inside. "A lifetime ago, before I became someone else entirely." As we entered the cabin, I struggled to integrate this new piece into the already complex puzzle of our situation. Daniel's cryptic message about someone from his past took on new significance. Had he maintained contact with Jessica all these years, or had their paths crossed again through the twisted connections of Global Meridian's corruption? The cabin's interior was Spartan, but prepared for our arrival bottled water, energy bars, a first aid kit, and most surprisingly, a satellite phone that looked significantly more advanced than civilian technology. "We don't have much time," Jessica said, all business now as she checked her watch. "Border Patrol changes shifts in 90 minutes. That's our window to cross undetected." Chloe, observing this new development with wide eyes, tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma, who is she?" I knelt to her level, finding simple words for a complicated situation. "Someone who knew your daddy a long time ago. Someone who's going to help us find him." "That's right," Jessica confirmed, softening her tone as she addressed Chloe directly. "Your dad and I were good friends once, and now I'm going to make sure you all get somewhere safe." As she outlined the next phase of our journey, a 2-mile hike to the border, crossing at a specific unmanned section, then another mile to a waiting vehicle, I found myself wondering what other surprises awaited us on this extraordinary path we'd been forced to travel. From a whispered warning in an airport to an international escape coordinated by a long-lost girlfriend turned covert operative, nothing in my 68 years had prepared me for any of this. Yet here I stood, ready to follow this ghost from my son's past into yet another unknown. Because when protecting family, there is no map too complex, no journey too daunting, no ally too unexpected. The border crossing proceeded with practiced efficiency. Jessica guided us along game trails so faint they were nearly invisible, her movements betraying years of fieldcraft that I could only imagine. We maintained silence except for essential communication, with Chloe understanding the gravity of our situation despite her age, following instructions without question. "See that line of rocks?" Jessica whispered, pointing to an unremarkable arrangement of stones that seemed natural to my untrained eye. "That's the border. Once we cross, we're in Canada. Different jurisdiction, different pursuers. Gives us an advantage, at least temporarily." "Will they follow us?" Catherine asked, adjusting Chloe's hood against the morning chill. "Eventually," Jessica confirmed. "But international coordination takes time, even for organizations with their resources. That delay is what we're counting on." We crossed the invisible line between nations with no ceremony, no acknowledgement beyond Jessica's brief nod of satisfaction. The forest on the Canadian side looked identical, the same pines, the same underbrush, the same bird song. Yet knowing we had left American soil created a psychological shift I couldn't quite articulate. Another hour of hiking brought us to a narrow dirt road where a nondescript SUV waited, partially concealed by overhanging branches. A man leaned against the vehicle, straightening as we approached. Jessica raised her hand in greeting, and he responded with a casual salute that suggested military background. "This is Marcus," Jessica introduced briefly. "He'll drive the first leg. No questions. Please." Marcus nodded to us without speaking, helping load our backpacks into the vehicle before holding the door as we climbed in. Chloe, exhausted from our night journey, fell asleep almost immediately against Catherine's side. I found myself fighting similar fatigue, the adrenaline that had sustained me finally ebbing now that we had reached this milestone. "You should rest," Jessica advised from the front passenger seat as Marcus drove smoothly along back roads, avoiding main highways. "It's another 6 hours to the safe house." "Where are we going?" I asked, needing some anchor in this sea of uncertainty. "A property outside Montreal, remote, secure, off official records." She turned slightly, meeting my eyes. "Daniel is waiting there." The simple statement jolted me fully awake. "Daniel's in Montreal. I thought he was in—" "We maintained that fiction deliberately," Jessica explained. "Even with Catherine, the fewer people who knew his actual location, the safer for everyone." Catherine stirred beside me. "You lied to me." "Daniel lied to you," Jessica corrected without apology. "Operational security. If you had been captured and questioned, you couldn't reveal what you didn't know." The cold calculation behind such planning, the layers of deception, the contingencies for capture and interrogation painted my son in a light I'd never considered before. The methodical accountant I'd raised had orchestrated an international whistleblowing operation and escape plan worthy of an intelligence agency. "How do you fit into all this?" I asked Jessica directly. "After 20 years of silence, you suddenly appear as Daniel's trusted contact." Something flickered across her face, regret, perhaps, or simply recognition of the complexity of her role. "It wasn't sudden. Amanda, Daniel and I reconnected 3 years ago when my agency was investigating financial irregularities that intersected with Global Meridian's operations." "Your agency?" I pressed. "I can't be more specific," she replied with practiced neutrality. "But when Daniel realized what he had discovered, he reached out through channels we had established during that investigation. What he found went far beyond our initial concerns. The weapons dealing alone crossed multiple international jurisdictions. The landscape outside our windows gradually transformed from dense forest to scattered farmland as we continued eastward. Chloe slept on, her face peaceful in unconsciousness, blissfully unaware of the international intrigue surrounding her father's actions. "Does she know?" I asked Catherine quietly, nodding toward our granddaughter. "About her father's relationship with Jessica." Catherine shook her head. "Daniel never mentioned her to me, not even when we were married. Whatever happened between them was something he kept completely private." The journey continued in relative silence, with brief stops only when absolutely necessary for restrooms or to switch vehicles, a precaution Jessica insisted upon despite no obvious signs of pursuit. By late afternoon, we had reached the outskirts of Montreal, then continued north into increasingly rural territory. As dusk approached, Marcus turned onto a narrow gravel road that wound through thick woods for several miles before opening onto a clearing where a substantial log home stood, smoke curling invitingly from its chimney. My heart raced as we pulled up to the house, scanning the porch and windows for any sign of Daniel. The front door opened as Marcus cut the engine. A figure stepped out, tall and familiar despite the beard he'd grown since I'd last seen him, and my breath caught in my throat. "Daddy!" Chloe's cry shattered the moment as she bolted from the car, suddenly wide awake and running full tilt toward her father. Daniel caught her in mid-leap, spinning her around as she wrapped her arms around his neck. The raw emotion on his face, joy, relief, love told its own story of the sacrifice and worry he'd endured during our separation. Catherine and I approached more slowly, both overwhelmed in our own ways by this reunion that had seemed increasingly improbable with each passing day. When Daniel finally set Chloe down, he embraced Catherine briefly before turning to me. "Mom," he said simply, his voice breaking slightly as he pulled me into a tight hug. "You did it. You actually did it. We did what you asked," I replied, my own voice unsteady. "Though your instructions could have been a bit more detailed." A surprised laugh escaped him, the first genuine moment of lightness in this entire ordeal. "I'll remember that for the next international corruption scandal I expose." Inside, The house revealed itself to be both comfortable and strategically designed, large windows offering clear sightlines to all approaches, multiple exit points, a basement level that could serve as a bunker if needed. Someone had prepared for our arrival with homemade soup simmering on the stove and beds made up with fresh linens. After Chloe had been fed, bathed, and settled into a bedroom with both parents taking turns telling her bedtime stories, Daniel, Jessica, and I gathered in the main room. The weight of unanswered questions hung between us, demanding address now that the immediate crisis of our escape had been resolved. "I owe you both explanations," Daniel acknowledged, pouring 3 glasses of whiskey and passing them around. "Where to begin?" "The beginning would be traditional," I suggested, taking a seat by the fire. "How did a financial director at an investment firm stumble onto international crime that warranted all this?" I gestured around us at our current circumstance. Daniel sighed, the sound carrying the burden of months of secrets. "It started with discrepancies in our humanitarian investment fund, small inconsistencies that wouldn't trigger standard audits, but caught my attention because of their pattern. When I investigated, I found a shadow accounting system tracking the actual movement of funds to entities on international terrorism watch lists. And instead of walking away, you dug deeper," Jessica added, her tone suggesting both admiration and exasperation. "I couldn't just ignore it," Daniel defended. "Once I understood what was happening, that Global Meridian was using humanitarian aid as cover for weapons deals in conflict zones, that we were essentially profiting from both causing and alleviating suffering, I had to document everything. At extraordinary risk to yourself," I observed, "and ultimately to us." His expression clouded with guilt. "I never intended to involve either of you. The plan was to compile the evidence, secure it off-site, then deliver it to Thomas Reynolds myself before disappearing. But they started watching me too closely. Every communication, every movement monitored. So you used Chloe as your messenger," I said, unable to keep a hint of judgment from my voice. "A 7-year-old child." "It was Jessica's suggestion," he admitted, glancing toward her. "Children are often invisible in security calculations. No one would suspect I'd entrust critical information to my daughter." Jessica met my questioning gaze directly. "It was the safest option among bad choices. Amanda, these people had already killed the CFO when he raised questions about certain transactions. Daniel was next on their list. They were just gathering replacement options before eliminating him." The blunt assessment sent a chill through me despite the fire's warmth. "And now what happens now that the evidence is public, that arrests are being made?" Daniel and Jessica exchanged a look that communicated volumes about shared knowledge. "We've dealt a significant blow," Daniel explained carefully. "But what you've seen in the news represents only the most visible players. There are others, government officials, intelligence assets, military contractors whose names weren't in the files I leaked because their connections were too well obscured. Meaning we're still in danger," I concluded. "Meaning we need to disappear," he corrected gently. "All of us. New identities, new location, new lives. At least until the full investigation concludes and all principals are accounted for." The magnitude of this statement, the complete abandonment of our former lives, settled over me like a physical weight. I thought of my home filled with decades of memories, my friends, my community, all left behind without proper goodbyes. "For how long?" I asked, the question that had haunted me since Catherine's arrival at the cabin. Daniel and Jessica exchanged another glance before he answered. "Minimum of 2 years, possibly longer." 2 years, I repeated, the number simultaneously shocking and yet somehow less devastating than the forever I had feared. "And then, best case scenario, the investigation concludes successfully, all major players are prosecuted, and we can return with reasonable safety measures," Jessica outlined. "Worst case, the corruption proves too deeply embedded, too protected by powerful interests, and a return becomes too dangerous to risk." I absorbed this assessment, searching for the right question among the hundreds swirling in my mind. "Where will we go?" "New Zealand," Daniel answered. "Remote enough to be secure, stable government, English-speaking, good educational system for Chloe." His expression softened. "We've secured a small farm property, nothing extravagant, but comfortable. Room for all of us. All of us, including Catherine," I couldn't help asking, glancing toward the hallway where she was still with Chloe. "That's her choice," Daniel replied carefully. But yes, arrangements have been made if she chooses to come. Chloe needs both her parents now more than ever. I nodded, understanding the priority of keeping their daughter's world as stable as possible, despite everything else that had changed. And Jessica, I asked, turning toward her. I'll oversee the transition, she answered. Ensure the new identities hold, that you're safely established. Then I returned to my work. The conversation continued late into the night, filling in the considerable gaps in my understanding, how Daniel had gathered the evidence, how Jessica had helped create our escape route, how the safe house in New Zealand had been secured through channels that couldn't be traced back to any of us. As midnight approached, exhaustion finally claimed me. Daniel showed me to a comfortable bedroom, lingering at the door as I prepared to close it. I never properly thanked you, he said quietly. What you did protecting Chloe, delivering the evidence, evading professional pursuers, it was extraordinary. I'm her grandmother, I replied simply. And your mother? There was no other choice. He smiled, the expression reminiscent of the little boy who had once looked at me with the same unwavering faith. Dad always said you were the strongest person he knew. I never fully understood what he meant until now. After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed, contemplating the journey that had brought me here and the one still to come. 2 years minimum in a foreign country, living under an assumed identity, leaving behind everything familiar, a complete reinvention at 68 years old. Yet, as I prepared for sleep in this temporary safe haven with my son, granddaughter, and even my former daughter-in-law all under one roof, I realized that what truly mattered had not been left behind at all. The essential core remained intact: my family, my values, my capacity to face whatever challenges lay ahead. From that first whispered warning in the airport, "He's gone, we need to leave now," to this moment of temporary sanctuary, I had been transformed not just by circumstances beyond my control, but by my own choices in response to those circumstances. I had discovered capabilities I never knew I possessed, courage I had never needed to test, and a resolve that would now carry us forward into our uncertain future. Whatever waited in New Zealand, whatever new life we would build there, I would face it with the same determination that had brought us safely to this moment. Not just a grandmother protecting her family, but a woman who had stared down danger and found herself equal to its challenge. A woman who had heard a child's warning and changed everything. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of crystalline Canadian spring day that made our circumstances seem all the more surreal. At breakfast, Jessica laid out the timeline for our transition to New Zealand. "We'll stay here 1 week," she explained, spreading maps and documents across the kitchen table. "That gives us time to finalize your new documentation and for the initial media frenzy around Global Meridian to settle. We've arranged transport through diplomatic channels, fewer questions. Minimal paper trail." "Diplomatic channels?" I raised an eyebrow. "Just how high level is your agency?" She smiled thinly. "High enough. The New Zealand property is ready. It's a small farm about an hour outside of Wellington, remote but not isolated. Previous owners were a British couple who retired there 15 years ago and recently decided to return to England for family reasons. The community knows them as quiet, privacy-focused people who kept to themselves. Your cover will be similar: a family from Canada relocating for health and lifestyle reasons." "Who exactly will we be?" Catherine asked, pouring more coffee. Jessica slid folders toward each of us. "The Matthews family. Daniel and Catherine Matthews, their daughter Emily, and grandmother Margaret. Background documents, personal histories. Even digital footprints have been established going back several years. Nothing elaborate enough to draw attention, just sufficient to withstand casual scrutiny." I opened my folder to find a Canadian passport in the name of Margaret Matthews, complete with a photo of me I didn't remember having taken, credit cards, driver's license, even medical records, a complete identity manufactured from thin air. "Emily," Chloe piped up, her interest piqued by her new name. "I get to be someone else too. Just like in our game," I confirmed, watching her accept this latest development with the resilience of childhood. "You'll be Emily Matthews, and I'll be your Grandma Margaret." "I like Margaret," she decided. "It sounds fancy." A small laugh rippled through the tension in the room, a moment of lightness in the heaviness of our situation. "The week ahead will be dedicated to preparation," Jessica continued. learning your backstories, practicing your new identities, understanding security protocols. Daniel and I will also monitor the Global Meridian investigation, tracking which principals have been arrested and which remain at large. What about our current lives? I asked. Our homes, possessions, arrangements have been made, Daniel explained gently. A law firm specializing in estate management will handle the essentials property taxes, minimal maintenance, storage of personal items, nothing that suggests abandonment, just extended absence. And my students, my friends, the weight of these severed connections pressed against my chest. People will worry. A carefully crafted story has been circulated, Jessica responded. Family health crisis requiring extended travel, vague enough to discourage questions, plausible enough to be believed. The same for Daniel's colleagues and Catherine's clients. I nodded, absorbing the clinical efficiency with which our lives were being dismantled and reconstructed. Necessary, I reminded myself. All necessary to protect what matters most. The days passed in a blur of preparation. Jessica proved a demanding but effective instructor, drilling us on our new identities until they began to feel like a second skin. Catherine, to my surprise, threw herself into the process with unexpected dedication, studying maps of Wellington, researching New Zealand culture, even practicing subtle changes to her American accent. I've spent 2 years running from responsibility, she explained when I commented on her commitment. This is my chance to run toward it instead. One evening, finding myself unable to sleep, I wandered to the kitchen for tea and discovered Daniel at the table, poring over newspaper clippings and printouts by the dim light above the sink. Keeping tabs on your handiwork, I asked, filling the kettle. He looked up, fatigue etched into his face. Trying to calculate the ripple effects. 17 executives arrested so far. The CEO cut a deal, rolled on several board members, 3 senators and a federal judge implicated, assets frozen across 9 countries. Impressive for a financial director with a conscience. A shadow crossed his features. And at least 2 people dead. The CFO's suicide was almost certainly murder, and a compliance officer in the London office was killed in what police are calling a mugging gone wrong. He pushed the papers away, rubbing his eyes. I keep asking myself if it was worth it. I sat across from him, laying my hand over his. When you were 10, you found a neighbor boy tormenting a stray dog. Instead of walking away, you intervened. The boy was bigger, meaner. But you stood your ground until he left the animal alone. You came home with a bloody nose and no regrets. I squeezed his hand. You haven't changed, Daniel. The stakes are higher, the consequences more severe, but your moral compass points true. I dragged my family into danger, he countered. Used my daughter as a courier, forced my mother into a life on the run. You trusted us with the truth and gave us the tools to protect ourselves, I corrected. That's not endangering your family, that's respecting our agency. I'm proud of the man you are, the choices you've made. Your father would be too. He held my gaze, searching for reassurance. New Zealand might be permanent. Mom, 2 years could become forever. Then we'll make a good life there, I said simply. Chloe will grow up with both parents. You'll find meaningful work that doesn't compromise your ethics. Catherine might rediscover what made her choose your family in the first place. And I'll enjoy my grandmotherhood in a beautiful country I never expected to visit. There are worse fates. A small smile softened his worried expression. When did you become so adaptable? Around the time my granddaughter whispered that we needed to leave the airport, I replied. Necessity is quite the teacher. On our 5th day at the safe house, the peaceful routine we had established shattered with a single phone call. Jessica answered the secure line, her expression shifting from neutral to alarmed as she listened. She excused herself to the study, Daniel following close behind. When they emerged 30 minutes later, the tension between them was palpable. What's happened? I asked, setting aside the book of New Zealand birds I'd been showing Chloe. Jessica glanced at Daniel before answering. One of Global Meridian's board members was found dead in federal custody this morning. Apparent heart attack, but the timing is suspicious. He was scheduled to testify tomorrow about government connections. And, I pressed, sensing there was more. And there's been unusual activity around your property in Chicago, Daniel continued. Surveillance vehicles, men posing as utility workers. They're looking for us. specifically for the source of the leak. The FBI has identified and arrested several private contractors, but we believe there's a more organized effort underway. Is our departure still secure? Catherine asked, drawing Chloe protectively closer to her side. That's the issue, Jessica said carefully. Our transport is scheduled for 3 days from now, but given these developments, I'm concerned the window may be closing faster than anticipated. My recommendation is to accelerate leave tomorrow night. Can that be arranged? I asked. Yes, but with complications. Jessica's gaze shifted to Chloe, then back to the adults. The diplomatic channel I mentioned requires splitting up, 2 separate transport methods, 2 separate routes to New Zealand. The implication hung heavy in the air. Daniel voiced it first. You want us to separate our family? Again. Jessica nodded grimly. The diplomatic flight can only accommodate 2 passengers without raising flags. The alternate route takes longer, but is equally secure. Which is which? Catherine asked, her arm still around Chloe's shoulders. The diplomatic flight leaves from Ottawa tomorrow night, Jessica explained. The alternative is a cargo ship departing from Vancouver the following day, 3 weeks at sea, but completely off the radar. How do we divide? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Catherine and Chloe should take the diplomatic flight, Jessica said. You and Daniel, the cargo ship. Absolutely not. Daniel's voice was steel. I won't separate from my daughter again. It's not ideal, Jessica acknowledged, but strategically sound. If they're hunting the whistleblower, they're hunting you specifically. Catherine and Chloe make a less obvious target. And if they're using Chloe to get to me, she'd be safer with me. She'd be safer reaching New Zealand as quickly as possible, Jessica countered. 3 weeks on a cargo ship increases exposure time. The debate continued, growing increasingly heated until I noticed Chloe's wide eyes taking in every word. I caught Catherine's attention, nodding toward the child, understanding immediately. She whispered something in Chloe's ear and led her from the room. This isn't getting us anywhere, I interrupted once they were gone. Jessica, if we accelerate to tomorrow, can you guarantee both routes are secure? As secure as possible given the circumstances, she replied. Nothing is without risk. I turned to Daniel. Then the question becomes which arrangement keeps Chloe safest and gets all of us to New Zealand intact. I don't want to lose another 3 weeks with my daughter, Daniel said, the pain in his voice unmistakable. I've already missed so much. Consider it from her perspective, I suggested gently. A diplomatic flight with her mother, someone she's just reconnected with, or 3 weeks on a cargo ship with limited facilities, seasickness, and confined quarters. Daniel's shoulders slumped slightly as the logic penetrated. She'd be miserable on the ship. And Catherine, I pressed, this is a chance for her to step up, to be the mother Chloe needs, to rebuild their relationship during a crisis, rather than returning to their previous pattern once this is over. Jessica watched our exchange with calculating eyes, letting the family dynamics play out without interference. You think Catherine and Chloe should take the diplomatic flight, Daniel concluded, and we take the ship. I nodded. I think it's the option that serves Chloe best, and ultimately, isn't that what matters most? The fight seemed to drain from him. What about you, Mom? 3 weeks on a cargo ship at your age isn't exactly a luxury cruise. I smiled wryly. I've always wanted to see the Pacific, and I've survived the past week. I can handle a few more challenges. The decision wasn't easy, but by evening, the plan was set. Catherine and Chloe would fly from Ottawa to Auckland via diplomatic courier, then be escorted to the Wellington property. Daniel and I would travel to Vancouver and board a container ship bound for New Zealand. Arriving 3 weeks later, Jessica would accompany us to Vancouver, then return to her agency once we were safely aboard. Explaining the separation to Chloe proved the most difficult part. She sat cross-legged on her bed. Mr. Whiskers clutched to her chest, as Daniel carefully outlined why she and Catherine would travel separately from us. But I just found you again, she said, her lower lip trembling. And now you're leaving. Not leaving, Bug, Daniel assured her, kneeling by the bed. Just taking a different path to the same place. Like when we play hide and seek, we all end up back in the living room eventually, even though we take different routes to get there. But what if something happens? What if bad guys find you and Grandma? That's why we're taking different paths, I explained, sitting beside her on the bed. It makes it much harder for anyone to find us, and Jessica is very good at keeping people safe. Chloe considered this. her 7-year-old mind working through the complexities of international fugitive logistics with remarkable clarity. Will Mommy and I get there first? Yes, Catherine confirmed from the doorway where she had been listening. We'll have the house all set up for Daddy and Grandma when they arrive. You can help me plant a garden, maybe get some chickens. Like real farmers. Chloe's eyes widened with interest. Exactly like real farmers. Daniel smiled, relief evident in his voice as the distraction worked. And when Grandma and I arrive, you can show us everything you've learned. I'll be really good, Chloe promised. And I'll take care of Mommy until you come. The innocent role reversal child promising to care for parent brought unexpected tears to Catherine's eyes. She crossed the room quickly, gathering Chloe into a tight embrace. We'll take care of each other, she whispered. That's what families do. Later, as I packed the few belongings I'd accumulated since our flight from Chicago, Catherine appeared in my doorway. Do you have a moment? She asked hesitantly. I gestured her in, setting aside the small bag Jessica had provided for our journey. Catherine closed the door behind her, then stood awkwardly, seemingly unsure where to begin. I know you've never approved of me, she said finally, and you've had good reason. I wasn't the mother Chloe deserved or the wife Daniel needed. It wasn't my approval that mattered, I replied carefully. But it did. It does. She sank onto the edge of the bed. And now you're entrusting me with Chloe for 3 weeks alone in a foreign country, establishing a new life. Why after everything I've done or failed to do? I considered her question, recognizing the genuine uncertainty beneath it. Because you're here now. Because when Daniel reached out, you didn't hesitate. You left your carefully constructed new life and walked into danger for your daughter. I paused. And because I've seen how you look at her not as an obligation or an accessory, but as someone essential to your being. I've made so many mistakes, Catherine whispered. Parenthood is nothing but mistakes interrupted by moments of accidental brilliance, I offered with a small smile. The only unforgivable error is refusing to learn from them. You have a chance to build something new with Chloe. Something better. I believe you'll take it. And if I fail again, then you'll try again, I said simply. That's what mothers do. She nodded, absorbing this, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a tarnished silver locket on a delicate chain. I found this among Chloe's things. She said you gave it to her on her last birthday. I recognized the necklace immediately, a family heirloom I'd received from my grandmother, then passed to Chloe with stories of the strong women in our lineage. It belongs to her now, I confirmed. She wants me to wear it until we reach New Zealand, Catherine explained. To keep me safe on our journey, I told her I'd ask your permission first. The gesture, both Chloe's offer and Catherine's respect for its significance, touched me deeply. I think that's perfectly appropriate. It's meant to travel through the women in our family. Catherine's eyes widened slightly at the implicit inclusion. She slipped the chain over her head, tucking the locket beneath her shirt. I won't let you down. Amanda, not again. Not either of you. I know, I said, and realized I genuinely believed it. Our departure from the safe house occurred under cover of darkness, the pre-dawn hours shrouding our movements as we loaded into 2 separate vehicles. The goodbyes were brief, necessarily so. Prolonged farewells would only make the separation harder for Chloe. I held my granddaughter tightly, inhaling the sweet scent of her hair, committing to memory the feel of her small arms around my neck. Be brave for just a little longer, I whispered. Grandma Margaret and Daddy will see you in New Zealand before you know it. She nodded against my shoulder. I'll take care of the chickens until you get there. I'm counting on it. I released her reluctantly, watching as she moved to Daniel for their goodbye. Their embrace lasted longer, Daniel kneeling to her level, whispering private words that brought both tears and smiles to her face. Biao-chan. He pressed something into her hand, a small carved wooden bird I recognized as one his father had made decades ago. A piece of the real Daniel Wilson for Emily Matthews to carry into her new life. Catherine's goodbye to Daniel was more reserved but not without emotion. A tentative hug that spoke of past wounds and cautious hope for healing. When she turned to me, however, she surprised us both by pulling me into a fierce embrace. Thank you, she murmured against my ear. For everything. We'll be waiting when you arrive. Then they were gone, Catherine and Chloe climbing into the SUV with Marcus at the wheel, heading east toward Ottawa and the diplomatic flight that would speed them to safety. I watched the taillights disappear down the gravel road, fighting the irrational fear that I might never see them again. Daniel's hand settled on my shoulder. They'll be fine. Marcus is good, and Jessica's diplomatic contacts are solid. They'll reach New Zealand safely. I covered his hand with mine. I know. It's the grandmother in me always worrying. And the grandmother in you has kept us all alive this far. He reminded me. Now we just have to get ourselves to Vancouver. Our journey west was less direct. Jessica drove, taking secondary roads and switching vehicles twice before we reached Toronto. There we boarded a commercial flight to Vancouver, risky, but calculated. According to Jessica, the last place our pursuers would expect to find us was hiding in plain sight on a domestic Canadian flight using our original identities. The search would focus on international departures and border crossings. She was right. We passed through security without incident, boarded the plane, and spent 5 uneventful hours crossing the vast Canadian interior. By evening, we had reached Vancouver and checked into a modest hotel near the harbor district. The cargo ship departs tomorrow at 4 p.m., Jessica informed us as we ate takeout Chinese food in Daniel's room. The captain is aware of your situation, not the details. Just that you need discreet passage. You'll be registered as shipping consultants conducting an efficiency study during the voyage. The crew won't question your presence. And once we arrive in New Zealand, I asked, a contact will meet you at port, drive you to Wellington. Catherine and Chloe should be well established by then. 3 weeks is plenty of time to set up your new life. Daniel pushed his food around absently. Any updates on the investigation? Jessica's expression tightened. The dead board member was definitely murdered. Toxicology found a compound that induces heart attacks but metabolizes quickly, nearly undetectable unless you know what to look for. And the government connections. Unraveling slowly. 3 mid-level officials at the State Department have been placed on administrative leave. A Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense resigned suddenly. The Vice President's Chief of Staff is facing questions about consultancy payments from a Global Meridian subsidiary. So it's working? I observed. The truth is coming out despite their efforts to contain it. Yes and no, Jessica replied. The corporate side is being dismantled efficiently. The government side. There are powerful forces working to limit the damage. Classified information privileges invoked. National security exceptions granted. She met Daniel's gaze directly. You struck a significant blow, but systems this entrenched don't collapse easily. As long as the weapons deals stop, Daniel said firmly. As long as they can't continue using humanitarian aid as cover for arming conflicts. That part is done, Jessica confirmed. Too much scrutiny now. Too many eyes watching. Global Meridian itself won't survive this. It's being dismantled by regulators as we speak. Then it was worth it, Daniel said softly. Whatever happens next, that part was worth it. Sleep came fitfully that night, my dreams filled with images of Chloe boarding planes that never landed, Catherine opening doors to empty rooms, Daniel disappearing into shadows. I woke before dawn, abandoning the attempt at rest, and found my son already sitting by the window of our adjoining room, watching the harbor lights reflect on the water. Couldn't sleep either, I asked, joining him. He shook his head. Wondering if I'll ever stop looking over my shoulder. If any of us will. Eventually, I assured him. Humans are remarkably adaptable creatures. Even hypervigilance fades with sufficient safety and time. Is that the history teacher speaking? The history teacher who became a fugitive at 68, I confirmed with a wry smile. If I can adapt to this, we can all adapt to New Zealand. We spent the morning in the hotel, Jessica deeming it safer than wandering the city. By early afternoon, we had checked out and were heading toward the commercial harbor where our ship awaited the Pacific Venture, a container vessel making regular runs between North America and Australia with a stop in New Zealand. The ship was massive, towering above the dock like a floating city of metal and machinery. Jessica led us through security with practiced efficiency, our consultant credentials accepted without question. At the gangway, she handed us each a folder containing final documents and instructions. "This is where I leave you," she said, her professional demeanor slipping just slightly to reveal genuine concern. "The captain knows to keep your presence low profile. Stick to your quarters except for meals and brief exercise on deck. Avoid details about your background if you speak with the crew. Daniel shook her hand formally, then, seeming to reconsider, pulled her into a brief embrace. Thank you, Jess, for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay this. Stay alive and keep that evidence flowing to the right authorities, she replied. That's repayment enough. She turned to me, extending her hand. Amanda, it's been an honor working with you. Daniel wasn't exaggerating your capabilities. I took her hand, then impulsively drew her into a hug as well. Take care of yourself, Jessica, and if you're ever in New Zealand... A ghost of a smile crossed her features. I know where to find you. She stepped back, resuming her professional stance. The ship departs in 30 minutes. You should board now. We watched her walk away, a slim figure moving purposefully back toward the security gate. Just before she disappeared from view, she turned and raised her hand in a final farewell. Then she was gone, our last connection to the world we were leaving behind. The Pacific Venture's horn blasted, shaking me from my reverie. Daniel touched my elbow gently. Ready for our next adventure, Mom? I squared my shoulders, adjusting my bag. Lead on, Mr. Matthews. We boarded the ship, were shown to our modest but clean cabins by a taciturn crew member, and settled in as the massive engines rumbled to life beneath us. I stood at the small porthole, watching Vancouver's skyline slowly recede as we pulled away from the dock, headed for the open Pacific and the unknown future that awaited us across its vast expanse. 3 weeks at sea stretched before us, 3 weeks of contemplation, of preparation, of transition between the lives we had left behind and the new ones we would construct. 3 weeks to reconcile ourselves to all that had happened since Chloe's whispered warning at O'Hare Airport had set us on this extraordinary path. As the coastline faded into the gathering dusk, I found myself strangely at peace. We had accomplished what seemed impossible: exposed corruption at the highest levels, delivered crucial evidence, and extracted our family from immediate danger. Whatever challenges awaited us in New Zealand, we would face them together, strengthened by all we had already overcome. The ship's horn sounded again, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to herald not an ending but a beginning. I smiled into the darkening horizon, ready for whatever came next. 23 days later, the Pacific Venture docked in Wellington Harbor on a crisp autumn morning, seasons reversed in the southern hemisphere, May bringing falling leaves and cooling temperatures rather than the spring warmth we had left behind in North America. Our 3 weeks at sea had passed with surprising swiftness. Daniel and I had settled into the ship's routine, taking meals with the officers, exercising on deck during designated hours, and spending long evenings in conversation, rebuilding a relationship that adult responsibilities and geographic distance had gradually attenuated over the years. I learned about the man my son had become beyond the broad outlines I had known before. His ethical struggles at Global Meridian hadn't begun with the discovery of illegal weapons deals. They had been building for years as he witnessed smaller compromises, gradual ethical erosions that eventually led to the massive corruption he exposed. He, in turn, listened as I shared perspectives from my decades of teaching history patterns of power and resistance, corruption and reform that had repeated throughout human civilization. We found common ground in our belief that individual conscience mattered, that single voices raised against injustice could catalyze meaningful change, even at great personal cost. Now, standing at this rail as New Zealand's green hills came into focus, I felt both trepidation and anticipation. Somewhere on those hills, Catherine and Chloe waited in what would become our home, a home none of us had chosen, but all would share. Nervous? Daniel asked, joining me at the railing. Curious, I corrected. I've never started over at my age. It's rather like being handed a blank journal when you thought you'd nearly filled the book. You'll write a compelling new chapter, he assured me. We all will. As promised, a contact met us at the dock, a weathered Kiwi in his 50s who introduced himself only as Murray. He loaded our minimal luggage into a mud-splattered Land Rover and drove us through Wellington's winding streets, then out into the surrounding countryside. The missus and little one arrived safe and sound 3 weeks back, he informed us as we climbed into the hills. Settling in nicely from what I've seen. The girls already made friends with my granddaughter similar age. Those two... Have there been any concerns? Daniel asked carefully. Any unusual interest in their arrival? Murray shook his head. Nothing out of ordinary. We're used to foreigners buying property around here, Americans. British, Germans looking for their piece of paradise. Your family fits the pattern. Foreign accent, good manners, keeping to themselves but friendly enough when approached. He glanced at us in the rearview mirror. The story about relocating for the Mrs.'s health works well. Plenty of folks move here for clean air and slower pace. An hour later, we turned onto a gravel road that wound through rolling pastures dotted with sheep. After about 2 miles, a modest farmhouse came into view, nestled against a stand of native trees with mountains rising majestically in the background. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a small garden had been freshly planted along the southern wall. My heart quickened as we approached. This was it, our new home, our new beginning. The front door flew open before the Land Rover had fully stopped. "Chloe, no." Emily now raced down the steps, her face alight with joy. "They're here! They're here!" she shouted over her shoulder before sprinting toward us. Daniel was out of the vehicle in an instant, catching his daughter as she launched herself into his arms. I followed more slowly, emotion tightening my throat as I watched their reunion. Catherine appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron, her face showing relief and something else pride, perhaps, in what she had accomplished during our separation. "Welcome to Matthew's farm," she called, descending the steps to join us. "Emily and I have been counting the days." Chloe wiggled free from Daniel's embrace and ran to me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Grandma Margaret, we have chickens, 6 of them. And I've been helping Mommy in the garden. And I started school. And there's a girl named Lucy who lives down the road. And slow down, Bug," Catherine laughed, joining our circle. "They just arrived. There's plenty of time to share everything." I hugged Chloe tightly, then looked up to meet Catherine's eyes. "You've done well," I said softly. "We've done well," she corrected, including Chloe in her gesture. Together. Murray unloaded our bags and declined our invitation to stay for tea, citing other deliveries. As his Land Rover disappeared down the drive, the 4 of us stood for a moment, taking in the reality of our reunion and our new circumstances. "Well," Daniel said finally, "aren't you going to show us our new home?" Chloe grabbed his hand in mine, tugging us toward the house. "I'll show you everything. My room has stars on the ceiling, and there's a creek behind the trees where frogs live, and the chickens have names." Catherine fell into step beside me as Chloe pulled us forward. "It's been a remarkable 3 weeks," she murmured. "She's thriving here. Amanda, the fresh start, the freedom from secrecy. It's been good for her, for both of us." Inside, the farmhouse revealed itself to be comfortably furnished with a mix of practical pieces and homey touches that Catherine and Chloe had clearly added wildflowers in mason jars. Children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, a quilt draped over the back of the sofa. The scent of baking bread filled the air, and a pot of something savory simmered on the stove. "You've been busy," I observed, taking in the transformed space. "Emily is an excellent assistant," Catherine replied with a warm glance at her daughter. "And nesting has always been my coping mechanism. When I can't control circumstances, I control environments." Chloe led us on an enthusiastic tour of the property, her bedroom with glow-in-the-dark stars carefully arranged into constellations on the ceiling, the chicken coop where 6 hens scratched contentedly, the vegetable garden with its neat rows of seedlings, the creek where she had already constructed an elaborate fairy village from stones and bark. Daniel watched his daughter with undisguised joy, drinking in every detail of the life she and Catherine had begun building during our absence. I noticed Catherine watching him watch Chloe, something vulnerable and hopeful in her expression. Later, after a homecoming meal of New Zealand lamb and vegetables from the garden, after Chloe had been tucked into bed with promises of family adventures tomorrow, the 3 adults gathered in the living room. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, warding off the autumn chill, and Catherine poured glasses of local wine. "To new beginnings," she offered, raising her glass. "To family," Daniel amended, his eyes moving between us. "To truth," I added, completing our toast. "And its power to transform." We drank, then settled into a comfortable silence, each absorbed in private reflections on the journey that had brought us here. Finally, Catherine spoke. "I've been thinking about what happens next, after the immediate crisis passes, after the investigations conclude, whether we stay here permanently or eventually return to our old lives. And," Daniel prompted, "and I've realized it doesn't matter," she said simply. "Where we live, what names we use, those are details. What matters is that we're together, that Emily grows up with both parents, that we're building something honest and good." Daniel studied her, surprise evident in his expression. That's not what I expected you to say. Catherine smiled ruefully. I've changed. We all have. She glanced toward me. Some of us discovered strengths we didn't know we possessed. Others, like me, discovered priorities we'd forgotten. I let their conversation flow around me, sensing they needed this moment between them without my immediate input. Their relationship, whatever form it might take moving forward, would be essential to our new family structure. Eventually, fatigue from travel caught up with us, and we retired to our respective rooms, Daniel to the second bedroom, me to a converted study that Catherine and Chloe had prepared with loving attention to detail, including a vase of fresh wildflowers and a stack of local history books on the nightstand. As I settled into bed, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary sequence of events that had transformed our lives. From that first whispered warning at the airport to this quiet farmhouse half a world away, we had traversed not just physical distance, but emotional and moral terrain as well. We had confronted corruption and danger. We had discovered reserves of courage and resilience we hadn't known we possessed. We had rebuilt fractured family bonds and forged new connections. Most importantly, we had preserved what mattered most, not possessions or status or comfortable routines, but truth, justice, and the family that gave those abstract principles their concrete significance in our lives. Outside my window, unfamiliar southern stars wheeled across the New Zealand sky. Inside, I felt a peace I hadn't expected to find again after the tumult of the past month. Whatever challenges our new life might bring, we would face them together, the reluctant hero who had exposed corruption, the mother who had found her way back to her child, the granddaughter whose innocent warning had saved us all, and the grandmother who had discovered her own strength when it mattered most. The Matthews family, once the Wilsons, would build a new life here, step by step, day by day. And if we ever returned to our previous identities and homeland, we would carry with us the lessons of this journey that conscience matters, that courage often comes disguised as necessity, and that family in all its complex, imperfect forms provides the foundation from which all other values derive their meaning. I closed my eyes, letting exhaustion claim me at last. In the distance, I heard the soft murmur of Daniel and Catherine's voices from the living room, tentative, searching, but together. And somewhere between waking and dreams, I smiled, knowing that whatever came next, we had already succeeded in what mattered most. We had saved each other. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below and let me know which part of this story resonated with you the most. If you enjoyed this adventure, check out 2 other stories that are channel favorites: The Secret My Mother Kept for 50 Years, and I Found a Hidden Door in My Grandmother's Attic. Until next time, thank you for joining me on this journey.